Hello guys and welcome back. In this Jetpack Compose tutorial, we're going to learn how we can create this screen using only constraint layouts in Jetpack Compose. So we're going to use several features of constraint layouts like guidelines and barriers. So stick around to the end to see them in action. Alright guys, so without any further delay, let's go together and build something awesome. Alright guys, so before we start here, we can come here inside our build.gradle file and we have to add the dependency for constraint layout, and the current version is 1.00. So let's sync here and we can start now. Okay, so now everything is set here. Let's create here a new composable and we can just call this movie screen. Okay, so now here we have to create our constraint layout. So we can just call here our constraint layout, and here we have to pass in a modifier, and we can just call here modifier.fill max size, and this is going to fill the whole max size. Okay, so inside here constraint, we have to provide references which can be used to constraint between composables. So in order to do this, we have to create a variable, and there are multiple ways of creating references, like a single reference and multiple references. So for case here, we have multiple items. So I'm going to create here multiple references by creating this 2 inside these brackets here and adding all of this. And after that, I'm just calling here create refs, and this is just going to create our references which we can easily reuse inside our composables. Okay, now let's add our first item, and here we can just call this icon here, and inside here now we can just call icons, and we want to call this menu here, and here basically now we can just pass in to be null. Okay, now here we have to constrain this by providing the modifier, and we can just call here we can provide here the constraint as in order to provide this to be a reference, and here we can just call here our menu button, and this is just going to tell, okay, this is just going to be a menu button. And after that here now we have to constrain this, so we want to constrain this to the top, and we are just going to constrain from the parent, and we can just call top here and provide a margin of 16 dp. And also we want to constrain this from the start, and we want to link this from the parent, and we can try to import this value, and also here we want this to be 16 dp. Okay, so I think here we have our first item ready. So let's create here a preview function that is going to help us to preview all of what we are just writing here. So let's create here a preview function, and we can just call this prev. And here basically we want to show the system UI, so we can just call this show system UI, and we can make this to be true so that it can show our system UI. Okay, so here we have to call our movie screen, and now let's try to preview here what we have written. Okay, so here we have our first item, which has provided here constraint from the start and from the top, and this is just going to be our menu button here. Okay, now let's add another component inside our code here. Okay, so we want to create this cover image here, and in order to create this cover image, we want to create an invisible line that is going to help us to constrain this cover image here. And we can do this by using guidelines inside constraint layouts. So let's create here a variable. So we can easily create here a variable, and we can call this, for example, end guideline. And here basically now we can just easily create a guideline from anywhere where we want. So for case we want to create a guideline moving from this position here until this position here. So this is just going to be, for example, like 40% of our entire screen. So we can just call here create guideline from start. And here we want to provide 0.4f. So this one is just going to create a guideline to this position so that we can just use to constrain our cover image. And here now let's create our image, and we can just pass in here a painter resource, and we want to provide our drawable. And here now we can provide our modifier, and we want to provide here our constraint as, and we can just call this cover image. Okay, now let's constrain this by creating here a start constraint, and we want to constrain this from the parent. And here we want to provide a margin of 24 dp in order to move it to this position here. Also, we want to link this from the composable, so we are going to use that menu button which we have created earlier there, and we can just call it .bottom, And here we want to provide a margin of 16 dp. And also here we want now to constrain this to the end, and we can just call this link to, and now we have to use our guideline. So we can just call here our end guideline here, and we can just easily tell it now from this position, now just constrain this. And here we want to provide 16 dp. Okay, so here we want also to add aspect ratio, and we want the height to be bigger than the width. So we can just provide here 2f to 3f. So this one is just going to tell, hey, just make this image bigger in height, in terms of height, than the width. Now let's try to repreview again and see the output. Okay, so here is just our preview, and as you can see here, the image is just bigger and taking up a lot of screen. So to fix this, you have to specify the width, and here we can just call our width. And we want this to take up the constraint, so it's take the space which we have constrained it to. So we can just call here dimensions.fillConstraints, and this one is just going to shrink this to match the constraint which we have provided here. Now let's repreview again. Okay, so here is just our output, and the image now has taken up the constraints which we have told it to. And also here we have our guideline, as you can see this visual here. So we have just constrained this to this guideline here. Okay, now let's finish up here to add other components. Okay, so next we want to add this text here. Okay, now let's create here a little room, and then we can try to add other text. Okay, now let's create here generic text composable. And here basically we want to pass in Ironman3. And here basically we want to pass in a style. And here now we want to provide a material theme. And here basically we want to provide header 4. Now let's put this in another line. Okay, so here we want to provide our font weight, and here we want this to be semi-bold. Okay, now let's provide here a modifier, and we can just provide here our constraint as, and this one is just going to be our title text. Okay, so we can just constrain this from the top, and here we want to constrain this from the menu button here, and we want to constrain from the bottom. And here we provide 16 dp. Okay, now let's repreview again and see the output. Okay, so here we have our text. Now let's add another text again. And this one is just going to be action. And here basically now this is just going to take 2 hours and 30 minutes. And here we want to make this to take up 16 SP. And here we can just make this to take up color gray. And we can provide here now our modifier, and we can just call here our mcons and provide our constraint here. And here now we can call our generic text. And for that case here now we want to link this to the top, so we can just call this top. And we want to link this to the title text. And here now we want to link this to the cover image. And we have a margin of 16 dp. Okay, so let's add another text here, which is just going to be for rating. And this is just 7.1 out of 10. Let's put this in another line here. And now we can just provide here our modifier. And this is just going to be as a rating text. Okay, so we are just going to link this from the generate text, and we want to link this to the bottom. And here now we can just provide our start.link to, and here we want to link this to the cover image as we have done to the previous, and we can provide here 16 dp. Okay, now let's repreview again and see the changes we have made. Okay, so here are just our changes. As you can see, we are just on the track, so we can just continue here to add other items. Okay, now let's jump inside here our code and add other items. Let's create here first a little room so that we can work with this. Okay guys, so we want to add this cast container here and provide these cast images here. And in order to do this, we have to use a chain inside Constraint Layout. So if you don't know about a chain, it's just a group of views that are linked to each other with positional constraints. So we can just position this in a certain place here, and then we can just link them by providing chain styles. So for example, there are different types of chain styles. We have a spread chain style, we have the spread inside, and a packed. So a spread is just going to spread the space evenly, and the spread inside, which is just a chain style that is going to take the first and last items, and then it's just going to fix them from the last positions, where for example here we have the first cast image and here we have the last cast image. Then it's just going to measure the space evenly here and provide other composables with the same space here. So that is just going to be spread inside, and then packed is just going to pack them inside the center. Okay, so now let's create here a chain inside our code so that we can just link these cast images. Okay, so first let's create here our text so that we can just identify this is just going to be a list of cast, and here now we can just call cast. Okay, so we can just provide here a font size, and we can just make this to be 14 SP. Okay, and we can just easily change this color, and we can just make it to be gray. And also let's change here a font weight, and we can just make it to be semi-bold. Okay, and here now let's constraint here our composable, and we want to call this cast text. So we want to link this to the bottom. So the bottom of this, we want to link it to the cast container, which we are just going to create in a moment. So we can just call this cast container here .top. And we want also to link this to the start, and we can just call our cover image.end and provide here a 16 dp margin. Okay, so we are just going to create a chain here, and we can create here another composable. So we can just nest another constraint layout inside here, and here we can just pass in a modifier. Okay, so we can just link this also. So to the bottom here, we can just link it to the cover image. And here we can just specify a margin of 16 dp. And here we want to link this to the parent.end. Here we can provide a margin of 16 dp. And also we want this to fill up the constraints. So we can just call here our width, and we can call here dimension.fill constraints here, so that it can just take the space which we have constrained it to. Okay, now let's add here the items. Okay, now let's add here our image, our first item here, and here we can just pass in here a painter resource, and here now we want to call this ara.drawable, and we can just call our first cast image. So we can just pass in here our cast image number 1. And here we can just pass in to be null. And we want also to provide here a content scale. So when this image is going to be scaled, we want it to center crop. So you can just call here content scale.crop, and then this is just going to crop the image. Okay, now let's pass in here a modifier. And now we can constrain this as our first cast image. So we can just call here our cast image number 1. Okay, so we want to constrain this to the top. And basically here now we can just link this to the parent.top. Okay, also here we want to specify the height of this modifier. So we can just provide here height, and here basically we want this to take up 50 dp. Okay, also here we want to constrain this to the bottom, and we want to link it to the parent.bottom. And we want to link this to the start, and we can just use here our cover image, and we can just call this .end and provide here 16 dp margin. Okay, so here also we want to provide this to be in a perfect square. So as you can see here, our items, they are just equal sized, and to do this we can just make the aspect ratio, and we can just provide here 1f. So this one is just going to force it to be inside a perfect square. So for that case here, I think we have added our first item. Now let's add other items here. So we have our second image, and here now we can just pass inside here our painter resource. And here we can just pass in our modifier, and here we want to constraint this. And for our case here, now we can just call this cast image number 2. Okay, let's also here specify the height, and we want this to be 50 dp. And also here we want to provide the aspect ratio, and we want this to be 1f. Okay, now here we can just link this to the top. And here basically now we can just link this to the first cast image here. And here we want to change this to be bottom. We can provide here end, and we provide here end of cast image number 1. And for that case here, now we can just reproduce other cast images. So let's press here Ctrl D in order to duplicate this. And here we can just call our cast image number 3. Okay, so here we are just going to constrain this to the first cast images, and we can just easily change this to be cast image number 2. So that we can just start where the cast image number 2 is going to end there. Okay. Now let's create here a box which is just going to help us. As you can see here, we have these items here, and then it's just going to indicate that there are more images. So we can just easily create here a box and add this text here. Okay, now let's create here more room. And here we can just pass in here a modifier. And we can just make this background color to be gray. Okay, so we want to constrain this as cast image number 4. So here we can just link this to the first image. Okay, so as you can see here, we are just linking this to the first cast image number 1 and cast image number 1 top and bottom. And here at the end, we want to link this to the parent end, and also we want to cast this from the start of the end of the cast image number 3. So after that, also here we want to provide the aspect ratio, and here we can provide this to be 1f. And here basically now we can just provide our text, and here we just provide +9. And here we want to align this to the center, so we can just provide here text align center. And we can just add here a little of padding, so we want to provide here horizontal padding, padding of 4 dp. And here we can just basically align it to the center. And here we can just change our color, and we can just make this to be black. Okay, now let's create here a horizontal chain, and we can just call this create horizontal chain. You can just also create a vertical chain by calling create vertical chain. So for case here, now we can just pass in here our cast image number 1. And we can finish up until cast image number 4. So here we can just provide a chain style. We can call here chain style, and we can just easily call, now we want to call this spread inside. Okay, now let's preview here. Okay, so here is just our images which we have created. So as you can see here, they are just distributed in the same line here, and they are just distributed evenly. So as you can see here, these two images here are just small because we have forgotten here to add a content scale. So for case here, now we can just call this content scale inside these images. And here now we want to crop this. Also, we can just add the same to this image here. Okay, let's re-preview again. Okay, so everything now is set up. Okay, as you can see here, we have all of our images and they are just distributed here by creating this horizontal chain. Okay, so now let's finish up here to create our screen, and we can just easily create here more space. Okay, so we want to add this text here, and we want to create here a guideline that is going to come below these two texts, these containers here, the cover image and this cast container, so that we can just place this text here. But we cannot just create a guideline by specifying the position because we do not know the height of all of these things. So what we can try to do here is just creating a barrier. So a barrier is going to reference multiple widget as inputs and create a virtual guideline based on the most extreme widget on the specified side. So for example, here we can just create a start barrier or a bottom barrier. So for our case, we want to create here a bottom barrier between these containers, this first cover image and this cast container here, so that we can just reference this and create this text here. Okay, so we can just come here inside here and create a variable, and we can just call this barrier. And here now we can just provide references, for example, of constraint elements. So for our case here, we have our cover image. Okay, now let's create here our text. And here we want to provide a string resource because I have added this inside a string resource IDs. So we can just call here ara.string. And we have here our movie description. And now here we want to provide also a color. And we can make this to be gray colored. Okay, and we want to justify the text because this text could be a lot. So we can just call here justify. And then we can just easily justify them on both sides. Okay, now here we can provide here the font size. We want this to be 16 SP. And now we can just provide here a modifier, and we want to constraint this as, and we can just call this description text. Okay, so we can just link this to the barrier top. Our top here, we can just link it to our barrier. So we can just call here barrier, and we want this to take up 36 dp margin. And we can just easily link this from the parent. And also here we can link it to the end, and here we provide 24 dp. And also we want this to take the width here to match the constraint which we have provided. So we can just call here dimension.wrap content. So otherwise this is just going to continue even out of our screen. So we have to make this preferred wrap content, so that because this is just a text and we want to continue in the next line if there are a lot of text. Otherwise, this can continue to our next line with only outside of the screen with just a single line. Okay, now let's re-preview here and see the output and changes we have made. Okay guys, so here is just our output, and as you can see here, we have finished to create everything here. And also we have added that barrier, which is going to create a visual guideline that is going to help us to align this to the bottom of these two containers here, the cast container and the cover image container. So guys, let's leave it here for this video. If you find value out of this video, please don't forget to provide a like and subscribe for more video. So see you in the next video. Bye bye for now.